Hello, everyone. My name is Brian Schurger, and I am going to be talking to you today about the emotion of awe and how it impacts cognition. So, when we're talking about the emotion of awe, awe is considered to be a transcendent emotion. Now, when they say transcendent, this means a person who experiences a lot of awe is likely to experience a lot of growth. They are more likely to accommodate the views of other people. They are more likely to be empathic. You are more likely to view yourself as part of a larger group if you experience awe quite a bit. The emotion of awe is kind of unique, not only just like as its constellation, but also as well as where it sits within the scientific literature, because it really has only been in the zeitgeist of like the scientific world since like 2003, and with this Keltner and Haidt article, and since then the area has just kind of exploded. So when we're talking about awe, um, and we're actually when we're talking about emotions in general, we're really talking about a collection of physiological symptoms and the behaviors that tend to result from that. Within those behaviors, that also impacts like how someone thinks about the world or how it impacts their cognition, which is why I'm talking about it in this class. So the emotion of awe is associated with a need for accommodation. So this is like PJ accommodation. So when someone has a mental model and they need to change that mental model, um, then that person needs to accommodate that new information. And this is different from assimilation, which is just adding more information onto that model. So, for instance, this could be learning about something that kind of redefines your whole world. Um, that, or it can also be elicited. I'm going to say that again. So that's the accommodation part. Um, it is often triggered by perceptual vastness. So perceptual vastness can be both visual, so either like a California redwood, like massive trees, that or the Grand Canyon. Um, that or they can also be more of a mentally perceptually vast. So learning about a new scientific theory or some new concept that redefines your entire world or your entire understanding of something. Um, some of the biological sensations associated with awe include goosebumps. They include some facial cues such as raising of the eyebrows or like lowering of the jaw, sort of like this, like oh my gosh, like gosh moment. Additionally, there are also neurological. There's a neurological constellation, um, which is associated with awe. So we are seeing deactivation of the default mode network for people who experience awe, and the default mode network. This is essentially activated when you are daydreaming, or when you are going on autopilot, and it tends to be associated with self-referential thought. So, just when we think about ourselves. Um, and then that essentially goes offline. It doesn't shut off completely. But the reason why that goes offline, and then another network called the frontal parietal network kind of like goes online. It has more activation when people experience awe. And that is more associated with paying more attention to the outside world. So what's going on there is that it's essentially freeing up. I would use the word neural resources, but if you're not really familiar with like neuroscience research, you might think of it as like brain power, like so sort of like shutting some areas off and turning some areas on. So basically, when a person experiences awe, they're in a state where it primes them to learn new things. And this has cross-cultural validity. So we can look at this in Japan or China or Singapore or Iran. And this has, we've tend to find similar sensations of awe, although it is not necessarily prevalent to the same degree across all areas. So I will be looking at two studies today. I'm going to be looking at awe, the small self, and prosocial behavior. That's a 2015 study by Piff and colleagues, and self-transcendent emotions and their social functions. Those being compassion, gratitude, and awe bind us together through prosocial behaviors, and that is by Stampato and Keltner. Keep in mind that Keltner was also big in the 2003 article, which kickstarted the whole awe movement. So for this study, there were actually five studies associated with this paper. I only included three of them for time. So in the first study, the participants played an economic game. They called like the dictator game. And essentially, if you're playing the dictator game, you're given 10 points, and you are told you are told that you can allocate those points to another player who didn't get any points. You can keep them all to yourself. You can split them in any way. And for every point that you have at the end of this game, then that enters you for a raffle to win either $10 or $500. After the participants played the dictator game, they then completed the positive emotion scale, and this measures 10 different emotions. Among them was awe, awe, happiness, things along those lines. And what was found as a result of this study is that participants who had higher dispositional awe, so that is the higher frequency of experiencing awe on a regular basis, and you can experience awe, 2 to 3 times a week. It's not always like big redefining moments. Sometimes it's just like a small like, oh, like that makes sense. I didn't know that type of sensation. So what the researchers found is that awe and contentment predicted greater generosity at the $500 level, whereas some emotions predicted generosity at the $10 level, but not the $500 level. Something I thought was interested was that compassion only predicted generosity at the $10 level and not the $500 level. Study four, I skipped the prior three because they were essentially just replicating the results of study one. For study four, participants were shown video clips of either something neutral, negative awe, and negative awe is essentially what is experienced after like a natural disaster, where your worldview and your mental model is redefined, but it's redefined in a way of like, oh my gosh, I can't believe so much destruction is possible, or oh my gosh, we just lost the farm. That and there's non-nature awe, which was essentially like a slow motion clip. So participants were inducted with these video clips. They completed measures of the emotions that they experienced when they watched those videos. These were all separate conditions. It wasn't just like uh, they one person watched all three videos. You were randomly assigned if you participated in this study. Then they completed a measure of the small self. Now, when we're talking about awe, the small self is very important to understand because the small self is a collection of cognitions which seem to prioritize the needs of the group and de-emphasize the needs of the individual. So it's not necessarily like a negative thing. Like it's not really thoughts that I'm insignificant. It's more thoughts along the lines of I am part of a larger collective. I am part of the human community. So it's more about like emphasizing group belonging. And we tend to see that to be pretty consistent across like the emotion research field when you're looking at all. And the 10 items, they were essentially agreeing or disagreeing with certain statements, kind of like, I am part of the human community or something similar. The participants also completed a measure of social values, including like generosity. And the conclusions of this that like the type of awe, so either negative awe or non-nature awe, awe is typically elicited from nature, were not discernible. It was also found that the small self um, mediated the relationship between awe and prosocial behavior. In the prior studies, they also determined that the small self was that the experience of awe did predict the small self. In study 5, participants were exposed to either tall trees or tall buildings. These were college students. They would walk on campus to a place with either tall trees or tall buildings. They were told that it was a visual perception test. So they looked up at the trees or tall buildings for 30 seconds, and then an RA research assistant came to deliver a survey. But on the way, they tripped, quote unquote, and they spilled 11 pens. Now, the participants who experienced the tree condition, um, they were more likely to pick up pens, help a research assistant pick up the pens, and this was their measure of generosity because there was a Confederate who was watching and assessing how many pens the person picked up. And uh, the survey that was being delivered, it included two scenarios that was essentially saying like, to what degree would you engage in these like, moral tasks? So there are things like if you received the inappropriate amount of change at the cashier, would you go and return it? Uh, so the So then the conclusion of this is that all predicted greater pro-social behavior, as evidenced by the 11 pens picking up, and less entitlement. So entitlement in that case being like, I deserve, X, Y, and Z. So overall, my conclusions is that I thought that this was a pretty good paper because it evidenced multiple methods of eliciting awe. I also liked that it demonstrated that awe did in fact influence the cognitions. These cognitions were to simultaneously, one, diminish the self, um, and also to prioritize others. And it also seems to make certain types of accommodations into the mental model of an individual's narrative identity. So narrative identity is how does a person interpret the events around them. The other article that I looked at was by Stancato and Keltner, and I looked at two of these studies. So essentially, uh, the researchers induced awe with a video clip, and then the participants completed a series of measures. And these measures were about 14 statements about capital punishment, and they were asked about their attitudes, either disagree, so things like, I like capital punishment or whatnot. And they also completed a measure of their conviction of the statements. And what was found is that all reduced the conviction compared to like the planned contrast, and the planned contrast were either like a video of neutral motion or amusement. And it was also noted that the condition did not impact like the extent to which participants chose favorable or extreme statements. So it was demonstrated that the participants didn't uh, didn't act in a way that they presumed would be favorable to the research assistants. And it was also found that the video condition didn't change how a person rated certain statements. So I skipped study 2 for time. Study 3 is that induced awe, pride, and a neutral emotion with a narrative recall. So just, it was something along the lines of tell me about a time you experienced X, Y, and Z. They participants completed a measure of conviction and of attitudes on immigration policy. So all of them were hot button political issues. They completed a measure of social distance. So that is, uh, they like on a 7-point scale, to what degree do you want to be neighbors with someone who has a differing view than you? This is after they completed the immigration policy attitude survey. And the conclusions were that, once again, awe reduced a conviction in statements. It reduced the desire for social distance. So people who experienced awe were more likely to want to engage in conversations with people from different viewpoints. Conviction was correlated with the desire for social distance, and reduced conviction mediated the relationship between awe and social distance. So the findings were that awe reduced conviction, likely through freeing up the rigidity of one's mental schema. It promotes pro-social behavior by reducing social distance. It promotes open-mindedness, as people are more likely to accommodate schemas that would serve the purpose of group cohesion. And from a new evolutionary lens, this may suggest that awe was selected for as a means of promoting collective action. Overall, I like that the similarities were that they both influenced cognition and behavior in both studies. All, both studies placed a great emphasis on group cohesion. They both demonstrated that decision-making process was impacted by the emotion, and awe was also consistently promoted, indicated to accommodate. Differences of the study is that if explored more types of awe and elicited in a more varied means, whereas Stancato and Keltner article investigated the mechanism of prosocial behavior. So this is like small self versus reduced conviction. So small self and reduced conviction are likely related. So for the next step, for the study I would like to complete, I think it'd be interesting to look at how like the other type of awe, so the awe that is elicited through learning about something new, how that might impact a person's cognition. So I think it would be interesting for graduate students to be exposed to new theories, and then complete the all experience scale. And then following that would be a semi-structured interview. So I would have participants like in one of four conditions, either learning about polyvagal theory, macrophage theory of depression, or cognitive theory. And I chose these theories because when I learned about them, they were like kind of the most like world altering. I would likely pilot test them just to understand like if they had similar effects. Um, and then for then I would also have like one neutral condition, and I would have that be a psychoeducational thing about the history of something. My DV would be the awe experience scale because I would want to know to what extent people experienced awe when learning about something. Then I would also do a semi-structured interview, and for my analysis, I would do some qualitative coding for themes, and then I would correlate those themes with the scale. Uh, Thank you, and that's everything I have.